So, good morning, everyone. So, today's article is the difference between a podcast interview and a media interview. So, this article has been written by Sampath G. Through the podcast is more demanding, it is also in some ways less stressful and uniquely rewarding. So, here we will get the insights about the differences between the podcast and the media interview. So, let's continue with the article. So, podcast journalism is a recent phenomenon. Most, if not all of the journalists doing podcast today would receive have no formal training in it. As one of the hosts of In Focus, the Hindu's classic podcast series on current affairs, I have read people frequently ask me how I go about doing things. When I try to explain, often the first thing I hear is, oh, so you basically do audio interviews. Well, not exactly. So there are different kinds of podcast. An interview-based podcast is one of them. It is true that In Focus podcast is essentially an interview with subject expert. It is also true it is done exclusively in audio format. There is no video element and the transcript does not get published in print or online. But journalistically speaking, the podcast interview is quite different from the traditional media interview, as we know and practice it. First, the two have different objectives. The purpose of media interview is to generate compelling copy and perhaps a sensational headline for the publication. The podcast is under no such compulsion. The objectives of In Focus is to explain or explore a complicated or interesting news development. So, here that author has pointed out the differences between the media interview and the podcast. What the author has told, he has told that since the main objective was to bring some news by the media, so and the podcast is that this will the in podcast interview, the whoever the person will be sitting, he will explaining the matters in all the angles of that. What is in his ideology about that sensational headline, what he thinks about that headline. So similarly, like that, he wants to explain. Second, unlike the traditional interview, the podcast is a collaboration between interviewer and interviewee. Okay, I did hundreds of interviews before I did a single podcast. In all of them, I just had to show up and start shooting questions while a dictaphone recorded the answers. I did not have to do anything other than try and ensure that my questions were answered without evasiveness or prevarication. It was slightly adversarial relationship. So, what is the meaning of evasiveness or prevarication? Let's see. Evasiveness. Tending to avoid commitment or self-revelation, especially responding by only indirectly. Here means without evasiveness means answering the questions indirectly. Okay, means whatever the question has been asked by the interviewer, and the interviewee is answering that question in indirect way, not properly answering the question. Okay, so it was slightly adversarial relationship. So one always try to keep things cordial. But a podcast interview is a partnership between the journalist and, in the case of In Focus, the expert guest. We share the objectives of decoding a complex subject, which brings us to third difference. I tells the guest in advance about my line of questioning so he can prepare. I would never do this in a traditional interview. So basically, in media interview, the questions are already thrown in front of the person who will answer that question, so that he can, so that before the time when the shooting will start, that he will prepare for all the answers. Okay. Fourth, in a podcast, the journalist is also a moderator. Journalist is also a moderator. Among other things, it is my job to quickly create a relaxed environment so that guests who may have never done a podcast before is at ease. Introduce the topics, steer the conversation smoothly from sub-theme to sub-theme with appropriate transition, and tie it all together nicely at the end with an outro. So here basically what he is saying that whenever he author used to do podcast, he used to make his guest comfort so that he will be so that he will answer his question in a very open mind way. Now open minded. In a media interview, when you have asked your last question, you don't have summarize. You switch off the dictate phone and take your leave. Explainer podcasts such as In Focus also differ from media interviews with regard to the magnitude of research involved. Most often, a journalist typically interviews people from his beat or in connection with his beat. So there is already familiarity with the interviewee or the subject of the question. If research is needed, it is specific to the news context or the person. It's for a profile. Uh, okay, means here the author is saying, or the writer is saying that whenever the media interview is going on, so the person who is answering the question, maybe the who will answer the question, he will relate it to that. Maybe his profile is related to the news, means whatever the means matter that is going on the media interview. Maybe suppose that regarding the election, okay, some questions are being asked from the bad person. Maybe he is an election analyst, or maybe he used to do some kind of election strategy in this where. So in that domain, that question will be reflected on the person who in which the news domain is in which there is a news domain related to that news domain. Okay, but in a podcast series where each episode is on a completely different topics, the interview calls for three different levels to research. You want to familiarize yourself with the subject along with the latest developments so as to come up with engaging questions. So, so in media interview you have to prepare it, but in podcast it is not like such that you have to already prepare whatever the questions will be asked. So you may be cool and calm. There is no need for preparation. Whatever with your little knowledge you can also explain the answers. You want to familiarize yourself with the subject along with the latest development so as to come up with engaging questions. Two, search for most appropriate and available experts. And three, to familiarize yourself with the guest works and special interest. Finally, podcast interviews have all new tech dimensions to them. Using the right microphone, mixing separate audio tracks, that is mixing from the traditional interview. Overall, though the podcast is more demanding, it is also in some ways less stressful and uniquely rewarding insofar as it's so collaborative exercise that orchestrates a convivial intimate space between the three curious minds, the host, the guest and the listener. So in podcast, it is very open mind. It is open-minded journalism, where the guest also is in comfort, and the person who is asking the question, who is also in comfort, and the listener will also be in comfort. Comfort means in sense that here it is asking that means here they will means they are free to say whatever they think. In general media interview you are bound to something. Suppose I means maybe you have to be well behaved, maybe means there are certain restriction in media interview. You can't answer the questions in that way. Maybe the interviewer is expecting you to answer that question. Okay, but in podcast you can give your insights, what means whatever you think about that. So here this is the article about the differences between the podcast interview and media interview. So that's all from my side. So it's a very good article. Okay, I'm sorry for the background noises.